What if the most powerful thing you could ever say was nothing at all? Lena didn't yell. She didn't cry. She didn't explain. One morning, she walked into the glass-walled conference room on the 22nd floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, looked across the table at the man she built a decade of trust with, and saw her entire world burn behind his eyes. Her name had been quietly removed from the biggest client account. Her designs were passed off as someone else's. Her reputation, weaponized. Betrayal isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's clinical, strategic. Sometimes, it smiles while slicing the spine of everything you once believed in. The room waited for her reaction. Would she shout? Would she threaten to sue? Would she fight for her seat at the table? She simply stood up, took one long breath, and said, "I don't need to be here anymore." Then she walked out, not just from the room, from the narrative, and that was the beginning of the storm, not for her, but for them. This is not a story about heartbreak. It's a story about silence. The kind of silence that doesn't surrender. It reclaims. You see, they were prepared for her to explode. They had already cast her as the emotional one, the difficult creative, the woman too passionate for her own good. They were ready to point fingers, to call her dramatic, unstable, too sensitive, but she didn't give them the performance. She gave them absence, an absence that haunts. There's a silence that screams louder than anger, that echoes deeper than revenge. It follows people through quiet dinners, into empty elevators, beneath cold sheets. Because it's not just silence, it's a mirror, and once you've betrayed someone who once loved you with calm, fierce sincerity, that mirror reflects what words cannot bury: guilt. Lena didn't disappear because she was defeated. She disappeared because she was done being a character in a story she didn't write. While Dylan scrambled to repair the narrative, explain her absence to investors, and maintain the illusion of control, Lena flew to Lisbon. No announcement, no drama, just distance. That distance? It wasn't just physical, it was energetic. She stopped carrying what wasn't hers, and in doing so, she stopped bleeding. There's something deeply unsettling about a person who doesn't argue, who doesn't defend, who just lets go. Because when someone refuses to fight, you realize they've already won. Not over you, but over themselves. Stillness isn't the absence of emotion, it's the presence of mastery. Lena wasn't suppressing her pain, she was owning it privately. She turned her silence into a sanctuary. And while they were still trying to understand her reaction, she had already begun her transformation. The office kept moving. Deadlines came, emails flowed, but something was missing. The pulse, the presence, the energy that made people sit up straighter in meetings. They didn't just lose Lena, they lost the version of themselves they were when she was around, because she made them better. Just by being there, and now, she was gone. This is the kind of power you can't fake, the kind of impact you don't realize until it's missing. Silence, in this case, wasn't an end. It was an evolution. So when people ask, why didn't she speak up? Why didn't she fight? The answer is simple. Because silence is sometimes the most articulate thing a soul can offer. Especially when the people listening were never planning to hear you anyway. And as you listen to this story unfold, remember, not every battle is fought with noise. Some are won with calm, some with clarity, and some, like Lena's, with the most haunting sentence of all, I don't owe you my voice anymore. If this story resonates with something you've lived through, if it hits that quiet place in your soul where truth and pain coexist, then do one thing: subscribe to this channel. It's how you help us keep creating these stories. Real stories. Stories that don't just entertain, but transform. We're building something rare here, a space where silence has a voice. Now, let's get you thinking. Question time. Drop your answer in the comments. When someone betrays you, what's the most powerful response? A. Speaking your truth immediately, even if it gets messy. B. Walking away in silence. letting time and distance speak for you. Type A or B in the comments and let us know why. We read every answer. Your experience might be the reflection someone else needs. Noah used to believe that being the calm one made him strong, the rational voice, the steady presence, the one who could be counted on to restore balance every time Mason blew another fuse. For years, he wore that identity like a badge of honor. It made him feel useful, needed, maybe even superior. But eventually, he realized something painful. Calm, when constantly offered to the wrong people, doesn't make you strong. It makes you a target. Mason wasn't chaotic by accident. He was chaotic by design. Every week brought a new disaster, a new enemy, a new betrayal. And every time, he would come running to Noah, spinning stories, dramatizing details, pulling him into emotional whirlwinds that never had a beginning or end. At first, Noah responded with compassion. He listened. He analyzed. He offered advice. But over time, that compassion turned into fatigue, then resentment, and finally, silence. It was a Tuesday evening in Austin when Noah made the decision. His phone lit up again. Another string of frantic messages from Mason, this time accusing a coworker of sabotage. Noah stared at the screen. He could already hear the voice in his head, the long rant, the sudden tears, the twist at the end, where somehow it would become about how Noah had failed to support him enough. He didn't answer. For the first time, he just let the phone ring, and then he put it on airplane mode and walked outside. That walk wasn't just a walk. It was an awakening. When chaos meets calm, it doesn't settle down. It fights back. Mason's silence didn't last long. He escalated. Angry texts, accusations, guilt trips, dressed up as vulnerability. Noah didn't bite, and that's when the unraveling began. There's a type of person who thrives on access, not to your body, but to your balance. They live in cycles of drama, and seek out people who will keep them centered when they refuse to center themselves. And when those people step away, the chaos isn't just inconvenient, it's revealing. It shows them the emptiness they've been hiding with noise. Noah didn't hate Mason. In fact, that's what made it harder. He loved him, in the way you love a brother who's lost his way, but refuses a map. He remembered their high school, years late-night conversations about dreams, road trips with music loud enough to drown out everything else. But the man Mason became was no longer a friend. He was a storm that demanded shelter without ever building his own roof. And storms, left unchallenged, destroy everything they touch. That week of silence turned into a month, and something began to change inside Noah. His mind, once cluttered with everyone else's emergencies, grew quiet. He started noticing things again, the way the morning light fell through his window, how good coffee tastes when you're not drinking it in a rush. He began journaling, running without headphones, cooking meals that required patience, small rituals of presence that reconnected him to something Mason's chaos had stolen, his own inner world. This wasn't detachment out of bitterness, it was detachment born of clarity. When you realize someone has mistaken your compassion for compliance, your help for habit, your calm for consent, you no longer feel guilty for pulling away. You feel free. The world doesn't teach us how to leave people who don't hit us, but still hurt us. People who don't scream, but drain us slowly. People who smile while demanding emotional labor we never signed up for. But Noah taught himself, not in a dramatic goodbye, not in a final confrontation, but in stillness. In the decision to let Mason figure out his life without someone constantly translating it for him. The funny thing about silence is it doesn't just create distance, it creates contrast. Mason wasn't used to silence. He was used to reactions, to being the center of someone's attention. So when Noah stopped playing that role, Mason had to look inward, and what he found terrified him. Because without someone to blame, without someone to lean on, he saw the truth. His life wasn't chaotic because of other people. It was chaotic because of him, and that kind of accountability doesn't feel like healing. It feels like collapse. Meanwhile, Noah wasn't collapsing. He was expanding. Emotionally, mentally, even spiritually. His life didn't get louder. It got richer. He made space for new friendships, the kind rooted in balance, not obligation. He no longer felt the need to rescue anyone. Instead, he built a life that didn't require rescue at all. That's the irony of silence. It doesn't punish. It purifies. So if you've ever been the calm one, the strong one, the fixer, ask yourself this: are you offering peace, or are you surrendering your own to hold someone else's storm? Because at some point, when chaos meets calm, the calm must decide. Not whether the chaos is worth fixing, but whether it's worth losing yourself over. Selene always had a quiet presence, the kind that fills a room without needing attention. She didn't command with volume. She led with grace. Years of ballet had taught her the discipline of stillness, the power of poise. She carried that into everything she did, including her relationship with Theo. From the outside, they looked ideal, living in a charming Parisian apartment near the Seine, sharing evenings over wine and soft music, attending art exhibitions, laughing with friends. But behind the romance was a subtle erosion, not in the form of fights or cruelty, but in something more invisible. Dismissiveness, subtle mockery, the kind of emotional erosion that feels like being slowly erased while you're still standing. In the room, Theo had a way of making Selene feel small without ever raising his voice. He disguised his disapproval as jokes, called her too sensitive when she expressed boundaries, made her feel like her silence was cold when it was actually sacred. For years, she tried to meet him halfway, not realizing he had already crossed lines she didn't know she was allowed to draw. The betrayal didn't arrive all at once. It trickled in like a slow leak until everything she trusted was soaked. He cheated with a coworker, then blamed Selene for the distance he created, said she was hard to reach, said he didn't feel admired, as if his disloyalty was a result of her restraint. Selene didn't react, not because she wasn't in pain, but because she recognized something deeper. This wasn't a man who was confused. This was a man who needed her reaction to justify his betrayal, so she gave him nothing. She packed in silence, no dramatic exit, no tears at the door. Just a folded note on the kitchen counter that read, "This isn't mine to carry anymore." She left behind the apartment, the city, the rhythm of their shared routines. And in doing so, she became the one thing Theo could never control, a mirror. Because here's what most people don't understand. When someone stops engaging, it doesn't mean they've lost their voice. It means they've chosen not to waste it. Silence, when anchored in self-respect, doesn't echo. It reflects. Theo didn't feel the impact of her departure immediately. At first, he played the story well. Told friends she had always been distant. Claimed she was impossible to connect with. Said he felt lonely in the relationship. He even began posting pictures of his new love interest, trying to prove he had moved on. But it wasn't real. What haunted him wasn't Selena's absence. It was what her absence revealed. Without her there to absorb his moods, soften his arrogance, and make excuses for his indifference, he was left alone with the version of himself she had always seen, but never said aloud. And that version, it was ugly. It's easy to project when someone is there to receive it. But when they walk away without explanation, all you have left is your own voice. That's the mirror. And for someone like Theo, that mirror was unbearable. He started remembering things he thought didn't matter. The nights she stayed up supporting his career dreams. The way she looked at him when he talked about his childhood. The way she always sat in silence with him, without needing to fill it with noise. Now, the silence mocked him. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't texting at 2 a.m. She wasn't asking for closure. She was simply not there. And in that space, the guilt became louder than her presence ever was. Meanwhile, Selene didn't disappear to hide. She went to Chiang Mai, not to escape the pain, but to meet it head-on. She spent weeks in silence, meditating, journaling, moving through grief not by analyzing it, but by honoring it. Every sunrise became a ritual of renewal. Every quiet night was a conversation with her future self. She didn't seek revenge. She sought release, and in doing so, she created something Theo could never touch: peace. The mirror he couldn't escape wasn't Selena's voice or her judgment. It was the memory of who he was when he was with her. She had been his emotional mirror, and now, without her, he had no reflection to manipulate, only himself. People like Theo don't unravel because of what you said. They unravel because you stopped saying anything at all. You took away their ability to twist your truth. You removed the emotional scaffolding they leaned on, and in doing so, they fall into the very emptiness they tried to project onto you. Celine never came back. She never reached out. She didn't need to, because some justice doe. The unraveling doesn't happen when you expect it to. It's never in the moment of impact. Not during the breakup, the betrayal, or the walkout. It's always later, quiet, unannounced. When the world thinks everything is fine, that's exactly how it began for Jordan when he left Mariah. It wasn't out of anger. It was out of boredom, or at least, that's what he told himself. Mariah was steady, introspective, the kind of woman who read poetry on Sunday mornings and cooked without rushing. She had a calm that filled a room without trying, but to Jordan, it began to feel too quiet, too predictable. So when someone new entered the picture, someone wild, untamed, intoxicating, he didn't hesitate. He told Mariah one evening over dinner in their San Diego home. His voice was rehearsed, void of guilt. He said he needed something more. He said he didn't feel alive anymore. She didn't argue. She didn't scream or cry. She simply looked at him, nodded once, and said, "Then go find what you think you're missing." It was too calm, too final. And that, he would later realize, was the first crack. Jordan packed quickly. He moved in with the new woman, filled his Instagram with travel, laughter, spontaneous beach getaways. His world became louder, brighter, faster. But beneath all the noise, something unsettling followed him, a kind of silence that had nothing to do with Mariah's absence and everything to do with her presence. He couldn't shake, because Mariah hadn't been just a partner. She had been a sanctuary, the one who held space for his confusion without demanding clarity, the one who knew how to sit in silence and still make him feel seen. Her love was never loud, but it was solid, grounded, and without it, his world didn't expand. It frayed at first. He didn't notice. He was too busy performing happiness. But slowly, the shine wore off. The new relationship, so thrilling in the beginning, turned into something familiar. Arguments, distance, emotional immaturity, masked as passion. The things he once called exciting now felt exhausting. He tried to reconnect with his old routines, the books he left unfinished, the music Mariah once introduced him to, but nothing fit. Because everything now reminded him of the person he left behind. Her touch was gone, but her essence lingered in the spaces she once filled. The apartment he now lived in felt hollow in a way that candles and laughter couldn't fix. The collapse didn't come all at once. It came in fragments, sleepless nights, memories that showed up uninvited, a growing discomfort in his own skin. He started drafting messages to Mariah, then deleting them. Not because he didn't want to reach out, but because he didn't know what to say. That wouldn't sound pitiful. Meanwhile, Mariah wasn't waiting. She had driven north, deep into the hills of Colorado, and rented a cabin with no signal, no internet, just books and trees and silence. For the first time in years, she wasn't holding anyone's pain but her own. And slowly, she began to remember who she was before the relationship. Not the version of herself molded to keep the peace, but the original, the one who danced barefoot in the kitchen and wrote poems in the margins of books. She started over, not to forget him, but to remember herself. Jordan thought walking away would make him feel free. Instead, it made him realize how anchored he had been by her presence. Not because she controlled him, but because she kept him from drifting into the parts of himself he now had to face alone. Guilt is a strange thing. It rarely looks like guilt. It shows up as anger, irritability, overcompensation. But deep down, it's an ache with no language. A knowing that you lost something not because it wasn't valuable, but because you didn't recognize its worth in time. Mariah never responded to the 2 texts he eventually sent. She didn't need to. Her silence spoke clearly. It said, "I am no longer available for the version of you that hurt me." And that message, it echoes longer than any reply could. The truth is, Jordan didn't miss Mariah in the way he once thought he missed who he was when she was around. The calm, the sense that even when life felt chaotic, he was tethered to something real. Now, he was adrift. That's the unseen collapse. The one that doesn't break your body, but your illusion. The one where you realize you didn't just walk away from a person. You walked away from the version of yourself you only knew through them. And no matter how far you go, or who you try to replace them with, some silences follow you, because they're not just empty spaces, they're mirrors. And what you see inside them is everything you tried to ignore. By the time Jordan understood that, Mariah had already moved on. Not to another person, but to a better version of herself. One he would never get to meet. Closure doesn't always arrive as a conversation. Sometimes, it never arrives at all. And in those moments, you learn the art of giving it to yourself. Not as a second best option, but as the only form of healing that doesn't depend on someone else's remorse. Ava had spent years waiting for emotional clarity that never came. As a therapist in Denver, she spent her days guiding others through their pain, teaching them how to set boundaries, how to find peace after chaos. But in her own life, she was stuck in a relationship that never offered her the same safety she gave to her clients. She kept excusing the inconsistencies, justifying the distance, finding meaning in crumbs of affection. The man she loved wasn't cruel. He was inconsistent. He didn't yell. He vanished. He didn't lie with words. He lied with silence. And that's the kind of wound that doesn't bleed, it bruises in places no one can see. When she found out he had cheated, it didn't come with a dramatic reveal. No shouting, no confrontation. Just a casual, almost careless truth from someone who knew. Someone who didn't even realize they were exposing something Ava had been quietly suspecting for months. She sat with it for 3 days, not because she didn't know what to do, but because she was preparing for the part that hurt more than the betrayal. Accepting she would never get the closure she thought she deserved. She wanted him to explain, to take accountability, to look her in the eye and say, "I broke something beautiful and I knew it." But Ava was done begging for the truth from someone who had built their entire identity around avoiding it. So, instead of sending a final message, she booked a trip into the Rockies, a solo retreat. No signal, no distractions, just herself, the trees, and a backpack full of notebooks. That's where her closure began, not in answers, but in intention. She spent the first day in silence, watching the wind move through pine trees, listening to her breath echo against the stillness. On the second day, she wrote him a letter she never planned to send. She poured everything into it. The things she wished he had known, the ways she had loved him quietly, the parts of herself she had silenced to keep the peace. She ended it not with bitterness, but with something raw and freeing. "I forgive you, not for you, for me." Then she lit a fire and watched the pages turn to ash. That ritual, simple as it was, carried more weight than any apology ever could, because Ava wasn't just letting go of him. She was letting go of the need to be understood by someone who never truly tried to understand her. She didn't need him to acknowledge her pain for it to be valid. She didn't need his guilt to begin healing. And she didn't need his words to complete her story. Closure without permission is a radical act of It's choosing to walk away from the wreckage without waiting for someone else to hand you permission to feel whole again. It's closing a chapter knowing the other person may never even realize it ended. When Ava returned to Denver, something had shifted. She didn't talk about the trip much. She didn't post anything. She just moved differently, more grounded, more inward. She spent her Sundays in silence, her mornings walking by the river. She surrounded herself with people who didn't require explanation to see her worth. The man who betrayed her eventually reached out. A vague message, the kind that pretends to be casual but is really fishing for entry. She didn't block him. She simply didn't reply. Not out of spite, but because she no longer needed a role in his story. She was too busy writing her own. There's a kind of strength in walking away quietly, a power in no longer explaining your pain to someone who caused it. Ava realized that peace wasn't about making things fair. It was about choosing not to let the unfairness define her. If you've ever sat alone with your grief and decided to be your own witness, you understand this. If you've ever closed a door knowing the other person would never knock again and still didn't reopen it, you know the depth of that decision. Closure isn't an apology. It's not a conversation. It's the moment you stop waiting for. Ava didn't need justice. She needed release. And when she gave it to herself, she stepped into something most people never find. Freedom that wasn't handed to her, but built from within. That kind of closure leaves no trace. Just a clean, quiet ending, and a woman walking into the rest of her life with nothing left to prove. There's a moment in healing that no one prepares you for. It's not the breakdown, not the silence, not even the letting go. It's the rising, the slow, graceful, unannounced return to yourself. That moment when the pain no longer defines your day, when the memory no longer stings, when you look around at your life and realize it's yours again. For Lena, that moment didn't come with fanfare. It didn't come with revenge or vindication. It came one morning in Lisbon, where the sun spilled across her apartment floor just the way she liked it. She was drinking coffee, barefoot, her favorite music humming low in the background, and suddenly, she realized she wasn't thinking about them anymore. The betrayal, the silence, the loss, it was all there, yes, but no longer in the foreground. It had faded like background noise in a new city. That's what rebirth really is. Not forgetting, but remembering who you were before the world taught you to question it. Lena had been back in New York for 3 months, not in the same office, not in the same rhythm. She'd started her own creative firm, one rooted in ethics, collaboration, and integrity. She didn't hire fast. She chose people carefully. She built slow. She didn't try to impress anyone. She just built something real. Her presence was different now. People could feel it before she even spoke. A kind of calm that didn't beg for approval. A confidence that didn't need to be loud. She no longer defended her ideas. She no longer sought out people to believe in her. She believed in herself. That was the most beautiful part of all of it. The way she didn't just recover, she transformed. They say silence is the absence of sound. But for Lena, silence had become the presence of wisdom, of discernment, of boundaries that didn't need to be explained. She had learned something that no betrayal could take from her. Peace doesn't need permission. Her rebirth wasn't something she announced. It was something she lived, in how she stopped over-explaining, in how she paused before responding, in how she smiled without apologizing. She wore her healing not like armor, but like sunlight. Soft, warm, undeniable. People from her past still watched from afar, Dylan included. He had tried to rebuild what he broke, but his foundation had always been built on borrowed trust. And when Lena took hers back, the rest fell apart. The company struggled. The team scattered. The reputation faded, not because she destroyed it, but because she had been the quiet glue all along. He never got an angry message, never got called out. But every time he saw her thriving without him, every time someone mentioned her name with respect, it chipped away at the illusion he had built to justify his betrayal. That's what rebirth does. It doesn't just change you. It reveals what was true all along. For Lena, there was no going back. Not because she held a grudge, but because she had outgrown the need to be understood by people who once underestimated her. She didn't need closure. She had clarity, and that clarity gave her a kind of power that couldn't be taken, only recognized in the quiet space she created for herself. Others began to find refuge too. Young creatives came to her not just for career advice, but for perspective, for permission to build something meaningful without losing their soul in the process. She became a lighthouse, not by trying to lead, but by simply standing in her light. That's the quiet legacy of a healed woman. She doesn't just walk away. She rises. She creates. She becomes the thing no one expected. Free. Rebirth isn't loud. It doesn't demand attention. It happens in the mornings you wake up without anxiety. In the evenings, you don't need to explain your silence. In the conversations where you speak slowly, clearly, without fear of being misunderstood. Lena's life was full again, not with distractions, with purpose. And the most poetic part, she didn't need anyone to know how far she had come. Her peace spoke for itself. If you've been waiting for the moment when it all makes sense, when the pain becomes worth it, let this be it. Let Lena's story remind you that silence is not the end. It's the doorway. And on the other side is a life you get to build, not from what broke you, but from what it taught you. Your rebirth won't always be visible, but you will feel it. In how you breathe deeper, in how you smile wider, in how you no longer shrink. Because the real victory is not being unbothered. It's being unavailable to what once broke you. And that, in the end, is the loudest justice of all. Silence isn't the absence of words. It's the presence of power. And when we trace Lena's journey from betrayal to rebirth, we see exactly how that power unfolds, not in noise, but in nuance. She didn't slam the door. She didn't plead for understanding. She simply left. And in doing so, she changed the story not just for herself, but for everyone watching. When Lena walked out of that boardroom in New York without a single accusation, she walked into a new era of her life. One not driven by ego or retaliation, but by clarity. The betrayal she endured wasn't just a breaking point, it was a turning point. It wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of her becoming. The silence she chose was not passive. It was an active, deliberate act of self-respect. And that choice echoed, not just in Dylan's unraveling, but in Lena's evolution. While he tried to cover the cracks in the foundation he shattered, she rebuilt hers brick by brick, far from the noise, close to her own values. In Lisbon, she remembered how to live without performance, how to enjoy moments that had nothing to do with productivity or perfection. She reclaimed her voice, not by raising it, but by choosing when and where to use it. That's the difference between reaction and response. One is immediate and emotionally loaded. The other is intentional, rooted in awareness. Lena's story isn't unique because of what happened to her. It's unique because of how she responded. She didn't allow pain to make her bitter. She let it make her better. Her silence wasn't a void. It was a mirror that exposed what others tried to hide, including Dylan, who had to sit with the truth that he lost the very foundation he thought was optional. And the beauty of Lena's silence was that it didn't stay silent. It evolved into her business, her leadership, her mentorship. It echoed in the lives she touched by simply embodying what it looks like to move on with dignity. From Noah to Celine, Mariah to Ava, Each person in this story chose stillness over spectacle. They didn't collapse under betrayal. They collapsed. The illusion that they needed chaos to prove their worth. They stepped back, stepped away, and in doing so, stepped into a version of themselves that no longer required external validation. That's the heart of Stoic justice. Not punishment, but presence. Not revenge, but release. To walk away without a fight is not weakness, it is wisdom. Because sometimes the strongest thing you can do is nothing at all. So what can we take from this? First, that silence is not about being cold or distant. It's about being intentional with your energy. In a world that pressures us to respond, to react, to explain, silence becomes a sacred rebellion. A way of saying, my peace is no longer up for negotiation. Second, that closure is something you create, not something you wait for. Ava didn't need an apology to heal. She needed a decision. Mariah didn't wait for Jordan to realize what he lost. She gave herself permission to move forward without him. Celine didn't stay in the room to defend her value. She left it to preserve her truth. And finally, that rebirth isn't loud. It's slow, subtle, and deeply personal. It happens when you start doing things that align with who you really are. When you stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. When you protect your peace like it's your most valuable currency, because it is. If you're in a season of silence right now, don't mistake it for emptiness. You're not lost, you're rebuilding. And that process is sacred. Let this story remind you that your healing doesn't need to be witnessed to be valid. Your growth doesn't need applause to be real. And your silence is not weakness, it is wisdom in motion. Now we want to hear from you. Which part of this journey resonated with you the most? Was it the moment Lena walked away? Noah's choice to stop enabling chaos? Selena's silent mirror? Mariah's quiet clarity? Ava's self-given closure? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. And if this story moved you, taught you something, or reminded you of your own strength, please subscribe to our channel. It's how you support us, and it helps us keep creating meaningful content for people like you, people choosing peace over noise, truth over attention, and evolution over ego. Until next time, stay grounded, stay powerful, and let your silence speak.